Alright, guys, so welcome back to the traditional channel. On this lecture number 15, we'll be talking about Marx's critique of capitalism and letting you know a little bit more about Karl Marx and the communist idea. Among the socialist critics of capitalism, the most influential was the German philosopher Karl Marx, who, with his collaborator Friedrich Engels, adopted Hegel's dialectical account of historical evolution but placed it inside economic materialism. Marx regarded his as the first science of history and the only scientific socialism. Human history is determined by the struggle between economic classes and fueled by changes in the technologies of production. Marx's critique of capitalism and vision of communism went unapplied until 1917 in Russia. Although it never inspired the revolutions Marx predicted in the most advanced countries, his notion of scientific social critique is always analysis of alienation, and his dialectics of history would have a widespread impact among intellectuals in the 20th century. Marx as a left Hegelian. The version of socialism produced by Karl Marx and his collaborator Friedrich Engels was a significant threat to liberal capitalism and affected the geopolitical world for a century and a half. Marx was influenced not only by Hegel, but by a group of young or left Hegelians, who produced a less Christian version of Hegel. As a Hegelian, Marx believed that human history is rational and goes through necessary stages in which the limitations and partiality of earlier eras are surmounted. As a left Hegelian, he avoided Hegel's Christianity and idealism, seeing the logic of history as solely due to concrete human activity. But unique among the left Hegelians, Marx came to believe that the physical productivity of humanity, and hence economics, is the true human essence. Thus, economic history is the key to what humanity has been and to the reform of society that must come. The version of socialism produced by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels claimed to be scientific, unlike the utopian versions that preceded it. With that insight, he began to formulate the historical materialism that would stand Hegel on his head. He incorporated the Hegelian evolutionary dialectic into a materialist, economic philosophy and anti-idealist philosophy. Marx consistently used Hegel's notion of civil society, but now in a wholly negative sense, to mean capitalism. Marx complaints against capitalism. Capitalism is ownership of the means of production, meaning investment capital and/or industrial resources, factories, and so on, by a class, the bourgeoisie, that employs industrial workers, the proletariat. In his earlier economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, Marx focuses on alienation. Capitalism makes the workers Infringdung, alien to themselves. Productive work is the creative essence of human being. In selling his labor power to the bourgeoisie for a wage, the worker is selling his species essence, the core energy and activity of his self. Then, at the end of the production process, the bourgeoisie owns the product of the worker's labor, sells it at a profit, and uses that profit to enslave more workers. In this way, the worker owns human essence is used against him. Marx, like Smith, accepted the labor theory of value. All value in the product comes from the worker's human capital. The surplus value of the product, which is what gives the capitalist profit, is nothing but the creative labor of the worker. The capitalist must steal this value from the worker to make a profit. And the profit margin of increasingly competitive capitalists will be determined by the need to continually lower wages toward the subsistence level. The rational self-interest of the owner will lead to the progressive degradation of the proletariat. As a result, capitalism is the most brutal and destructive of all the unjust economic systems of human history. Further, capitalism is irrational because it substitutes exchange value for use value. The value of a thing for capitalism lies not in how it satisfies human needs, use value, but in what price the bidding of capitalists drives it to, which would be exchange value. Individual capitalists are driven by rational self-interest, but the system as a whole is the most irrational way of allocating resources for human needs. No one in it is a whole human being. No freedom is real. All relations are determined by money. All human values are distorted. Materialist theory of history. The core of Marxist theory is its economic or materialistic theory of history. Metaphysically, reality is material, not spiritual, mental, or ideal. Applied to society, this means that the economic organization of society causes its social structure or relations, which in turn causes the forms of consciousness or culture of social members. The means of economic production of a historical period dictate the class structure of that period, which in turn dictates the culture or mentality of the classes. Economics causes society, which causes culture. The historical evolution of human society is based in the struggle of technology-bearing classes. In each period, one class is victorious and owns the most important means of production. Another labors for them, with another classes playing marginal roles. The ruling class sets up government and laws that serve its interests and promotes a culture that does the same. As the means of production evolve, a crisis is reached in which a new technology-bearing classes cannot advance because of the political, legal, culture, structure, and thus must revolt against it. If the new class wins, its members come to power, and a new technological period begins, dominated by a new means of production. In the medical world, the means of production was agricultural land. The ruling class was the aristocratic owners of the land, and the workers were the peasants. Over time, the commercial merchant class of the towns improved its means of production, gained wealth and power, but their ascent was blocked by the governmental and legal structures that aristocracy had set up to serve its own ends. Eventually, the merchant class gained enough power to stage revolutions against the land aristocracy. These took place in Holland, England, America, and France in the 16th through 18th centuries. A new regime was ushered in which the bourgeoisie ruled and set up new governmental and legal structures to enhance its power. Modern capitalism was born. But capitalism creates the conditions of its own destruction, which will then lead to the communist society, the final stage of human history. In that sense, capitalism is actually the necessary precursor to the good society. In a famous passage from the Communist Manifesto, Marx says that capitalism coarsens life, showing the power relations among men to be what they really are, naked exploitation. In all earlier periods, the ruling class attempted to prevent change, but capitalism lives on promoting change ceaselessly, dynamisms in its method. The destruction of capitalism. Marx claimed to have discovered certain inevitable tendencies in capitalism. First, as capitalism develops, capital is concentrated in fewer hands, driving more former capitalists and members of other classes into the proletariat. The rich get richer and fewer. Second, wages are suppressed toward the lowest subsistence wage. Poor become poorer in greater number. Marx believed that the concentration of capital in fewer hands would make the business cycle more extreme. Each new high would be higher, each new recession would be worse. At some future inevitable recession, the workers told they are laid off would refuse to leave the factory. Violence would spread, and the Communist Party intellectuals would seize the moment to direct the violence. At some point, the military themselves, proletarians, would take sides. Once this happens in one country, it will spread to all. Marxism is explicitly an internationalist theory. Nations do not matter, only classes do. Capitalism will destroy itself for purely economic reasons, leading to a bloody revolution of the proletariat, which, as the largest class of history, will end all class differences in a communist utopia. Engels' contribution to Marxism. In Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, 1880, Engels presents a useful formulation of Marx's position. In industrialism, production is entirely social. The factory system is highly cooperative, and that makes for the production at the highest level. But that stops once the product is completed because ownership is then not social. It is the private property of the capitalist. Marxism is the attempt to bring consistency to ownership and the process of production. Perhaps more interesting, Engels' The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, 1884, accepted the then recent theory that there had been primitive matrilineal societies preceding patrilineal society. Marx and Lenin thought this may have corresponded to primitive communism, the earliest phase of human society. In his book, Engels gives Marxism some claim on concern for the liberation of women. Marx's Communist Utopia. Marx had relatively little to say about the communist utopia, but a few points are clear. It must be classless. Secondly, the engine of history is class struggle. With no classes, the engine stops. Thus, communism will be the final period of human history. Thirdly, all humans will engage equally in practical and creative activities. The division of labor will cease. Fourth, the distributive principle will be from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Fifth, there can be no government because government exists only as a tool of the ruling class. In communism, the government is replaced by administration. The implication is that politics must also disappear because humans will no longer be divided into groups with distinct political needs. Man himself will be human for the first time. Even Marx did not think that revolution was a brief event. Rather, it is a process. The initial stage of the revolution is the coming to power of the proletariat. There will follow a period in which the proletariat will have to use governmental power systematically to reform society. The success of his dictatorship of the proletariat will then mean the achievement of the classless society. Marxism was an Enlightenment scientific theory. It calls for more efficient, more scientifically advanced industrial production. It is universalist and cosmopolitan in that nations, culture, differences, and racial identity are pointless distractions from the class struggle. Fortunes of Marxism. In the 19th century Europe, Marxism overwhelmed the so-called utopian socialists and became indistinguishable from revolutionary socialism. By the end of the 19th century, socialism often meant Marxism. Although there would be brief socialist revolutionary governments in Bavaria and Hungary around the end of the First World War, it was the Russian Revolution of 1917 that permanently changed the profile of Marxism. Marxist-Leninism eventually spread through the large parts of the world and led to many offshoots. The major distinction among Marxist political thinkers in Europe and America in the 20th century would be whether Marxism was compatible with democracy. Thinkers in Western Europe tried to formulate a Western Marxism, meaning still with the free elections and individual freedoms, unlike Russia. As people eventually came to see Russian communism as totalitarian, the question became, who did it? Was the destruction of freedom in Russia set up by Stalin or Lenin? Or is it inherent in the Marxist system? Alright guys, so I really hope you like this video, and let me know if you like the format. You can give me any feedbacks, likes, and subscribe, and really hope you like this new video.